Welcome back to Texas Liberty Podcast. I'm Clark Patterson, and along with Ted Brown, tonight we'll be interviewing Bob King, who's running for Congress in Texas, the Texas Congressional District 21, who I believe it's Chip Roy is the incumbent. We are recording now on Thursday evening, July 25th, 2024. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. And I'd love to hear your background, the backstory of Bob King. I mean, you have to have one of the most active campaigns in the nation. And so we would love to hear, your backstory, as to how you came to libertarianism. And so please take it away.
Okay, well, thanks both of you guys for having me. And it's great to be here with you. I'm like many libertarians, I came from another party and grew up kind of I guess what I would call a libertarian leaning Republican. And the story that I think you'll laugh about, when my mother was a Republican in Texas in the 1960s. I grew up in Dallas, and in 1964 she went to the polls to go vote for Barry Goldwater, and she took a 3.5-year-old Bob King with her to the polls. And she went in and closed the curtain, and after she voted, opened the curtain and walked out. And little Bob King was screaming and upset because he expected to meet Barry Goldwater in there. And so, so anyway, I was raised by a Goldwater Republican. And I think Barry Goldwater is, a pretty good go-by for what libertarians were like in those days. Because even though he was certainly very conservative on money, he was certainly a very states' rights oriented guy, very constitutional guy. But other than that, he just didn't care. He just didn't give a crap about what, how you lived your life or whatever. And he didn't care to tell you how to do it. And that really impressed my mother. And I think that rubbed off on me. And that had a lot to do with me thinking that way. So as I grew up and started voting, of course, I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980. So I guess I realized as I, grew up and became an adult and got in the business world, that Republicans really weren't interested in solving the problems they were paying lip service to. And that realization came along sort of through the Bush years. Not that I thought Bush was a bad guy, but I just thought that the party just wasn't serious about returning power to the people. And of course the deficit just got completely out of control during the Bush years. And so so I started voting libertarian, and I never had an intention to run for Congress until some number of months ago. And it's kind of a long story, but I had an opportunity to make a decision about whether I wanted to run. I'd always sort of toyed around with the idea of running. And I kind of realized, well, I'm retired. I don't have anything else to do between now and November. And I have energy, and I'm just mad enough to do it. And so a lot of it had to do with being mad, And the thing I'm mad about two things. Mad about, number one, just the amount of debt they're piling on to our grandchildren, which is, if you add in the debt and, the funded debt and the unfunded future liabilities, and you divide it by the number of taxpayers, it's about $700,000 per taxpayer. And, that's like 2 mortgages on a median home in the Hill Country. And you put a $700,000 judgment on every American in this country, and 99.5% of them are in bankruptcy court on Monday. So it's just way beyond what we can afford, and neither party's doing a damn thing about it. So that made me mad. And the other thing that made me mad is when I realized, I saw an article in a magazine about the 10 most affluent counties in America. And as it turned out, I expected them to be, places like Carmel and, Malibu and the Hamptons and Nantucket and places like that. But no, 5 of the top 10 most affluent counties in America are suburbs of Washington, D.C. 4 of them in Northern Virginia, 1 of them in Maryland. And so, it's pretty obvious what that's telling us. We're getting ripped off by the DC culture for every dollar that goes in there, about 80 cents comes out, and they live higher on the hog than the rest of us. So, and, you know, you'd think that 96 senators would object to this. You'd think they would. You know, all the senators that aren't representing Maryland and Virginia ought to be irate about it. But guess what? They live there too. And so that's the problem. So those things caused me to say that I'm going to do it. I'm going to run.
Right.
Okay, well, you've been very active, Bob, and I've noticed your media is showing that you're having all kinds of meetings and public events and meeting people all over your district. Can you describe your activities there? It seems like it's a lot more active than most libertarians are used to. It's
well,
it's
most other libertarians have a job during the day, and I don't. So I have the luxury of being able to have this be my only commitment for the whole year. So I've got 12 different locations around the district. Our district goes, you know, from Dripping Springs around Austin down to inside of San Antonio to Alamo Heights and all along I-35, and then all the way out west to Kerrville and Fredericksburg and beyond. So it's a very large district, and I got 12 monthly events in, you know, all these places in which we're growing volunteers. And so the side benefit, I guess I'd say, of this campaign is my goal is to give the county chairs a running start of new volunteers and possibly candidates for, you know, for more local positions. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm have, you know, 3 or 4 happy hours or coffees every week. I'm doing all the farmers markets I can do. I'm certainly doing some guerrilla marketing on some of them, where they, you know, some farmers markets won't let a politician come in and exhibit. So you just walk in with swag and you start giving your swag away to everybody, and that swag has your logo on it. And before you know it, everybody in the whole farmers market's walking around with, you know, with your colors and your logo. And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm raising money. I'm going not just within my district, but all around Texas, really, to friends and libertarian supporters, and raising money. And you know, you got to do that to get known. There's only without an amplifier, there's only so loud you can yell, right? And you know, there's probably going to be 400,000 or 450,000 people vote in this election, and you know, so. And we got 3 candidates, and to get 40% of them, you know, that'd be, you know, 160, 180,000 votes. That's hard to do without money. So I am raising money. It's certainly not Chip Roy kind of money, but it's enough. I think I'm going to scare the heck out of them. That's my plan.
Wow.
Well, why don't you tell us, Bob, what you say you retired this year. So what was your career before you retired? And also, what city are you located in now? Obviously, I believe you're in Congressional District 21. But
yes, I am.
What city? And yeah, what about your background? It sounds like you've just retired.
Well, not just. You know, that's kind of a long story, but I live in New Braunfels. In my first productive career, I was in oil and gas finance. So naturally, that meant I lived in Houston. And I was there until about 2012. And, you know, at about midway in my career, at about age 44, I decided that I thought I had enough money to be able to focus on something other than making money. And I moved over to nonprofit leadership because I just felt like there's a lot of people that need helping. And I thought I knew something about how to do that. And so I worked on a number of interesting nonprofits, mostly sort of jobs related, teaching people how to find work. That's a lot of what I did. I was a interim executive director and raised money for the Houston Community College and for a couple of other organizations. I worked for the Red Cross for a while. I did a number of different things. I'd say a lot of them were sort of gigs. I did that for 10 or 12 years. And then I said, heck with that. You know, we built a house in New Braunfels in 2012, and we were living, you know, about 50% in Houston and 50% here up until COVID. And when COVID hit, nuts to that, I'm getting the hell out of Houston. And so I'm glad to be in New Braunfels and have made a lot of friends here. And, so New Braunfels is kind of on the eastern edge of District 21.
Okay, so now let's get back to some issues. You were talking before about you were influenced about how the government's racking up all this debt and everything. What issues have you been running on? Obviously, economics are always a big one, but there's a lot of issues out there. What have you been focusing on?
Well, I mean, my focus is on the debt and what we're doing to our children and grandchildren. We could talk about this in economic terms about how it's creating inflation, how it's creating higher interest rates, how it's making it hard for our grandchildren to be in a position one day to buy a house it was much easier for us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But even more fundamentally than that, I'm a Christian, and I believe that when one generation is spending the money of future generations and tagging them with the bill, there's actually a commandment that forbids us from doing that. It's called the 8th commandment, and it's thou shalt not steal. And we are stealing from our grandchildren, and they don't have a vote in it yet. It's just wrong. It's a sin. And so that's where I start from. Yes, it's also going to get us in a lot of economic trouble. But even more fundamentally than that, it's just wrong. And so we shouldn't be doing it. We should be getting, we should be, living according to our own means. And right now the federal government's taking in $5 trillion of taxes per year, which is, I think, the most they've ever taken in ever by a lot. But yet it's still like $2 trillion short of what they're spending. And so that's just absolutely insane. And, neither party is even paying lip service to wanting to do anything about it. Because I remember, 15, 20 years ago when we talked about Social Security being the third rail of American politics. Well, now it's like the entire budget is the third rail. And nobody wants to talk about any of it. And so all of it's going to have to get cut. And we're just going to have to do it unless we just want to wait for our economy to just be like a bug on a windshield and just blow up, because it's coming. So that's sort of number one. It's not the most sexy issue. And, right now, if all you feel is, 15% inflation, or 20% inflation versus, right before the pandemic, and that's what you sense, that's not as horrendous as it's going to be in the future. And those of us who are a little bit older and have actually experienced economic cycles know that there's a reckoning coming for us with this kind of debt. We're now at like 125% of GDP, our debt. And that's just the funded debt. So that's my number one. Obviously, the other parties are framing the issues differently. Neither of them want to touch the deficit, because that would require them to show some responsibility towards it, which neither of them wants to do. The Republicans, of course, want to run on the border crisis, and the Democrats want to run on abortion, women's bodily autonomy, that sort of thing. And those are important issues, but they're readily solvable issues to the satisfaction of 2/3 of the Americans in the middle. Both the border and abortion are issues that can easily be solved through compromise. But of course, neither party wants to compromise, because that's where their money's coming from. And they use these things to scare the voters, especially the Republicans are using the border to scare. There are big border problems, and we absolutely, I believe, in order for the American people to trust the federal government to allow more legal immigrants in, which of course we need desperately legal immigrants. But right now, the American people don't trust them. And so in order for us to get back on track, we're going to have to lock down on illegal immigration. And so the way I look at it, if you remember when Reagan was president, he made the immigration deal with Tip O'Neill, which famously the Democrats reneged on. We need to do something similar, but upside down. We need to approve enhancements and expansions of legal immigration, things like legalizing the Dreamers and lots more green cards, and anybody who gets a degree from a U.S. university automatically gets a green card, all those sorts of things. Make it easier for us to recruit skilled workers. It's not all about picking strawberries. I mean, it's all kinds of workers at all levels that our economy needs. If we would just approve all of that and put it on the shelf and say that doesn't go into effect until the illegal crossings get below a certain level, then you'd have both parties paddling in the same direction. And that's why nothing's getting solved, because politically they have different objectives. And to be honest, abortion is a similar issue where, you know, if the Democrats would just accept, say, 20 weeks and say, well, you know, we'll go along with a legalization of abortion all the way to the 20th week, they will have legalized 99% of all the abortions in America. But that's not enough for them, right? they have to keep the issue alive. And so I think the two parties use those issues as the bright, shiny objects that voters get excited about and upset about, and it distracts them from what I think is the real issue, which is the budget.
Right. Yeah, I know that. Well, your opponent, Chip Roy, who's a former aide to my opponent, Senator Ted Cruz. These guys are definitely working themselves up on the immigration issue, and
yes.
Cruz seems to be promoting the falsehood that immigrants commit all these crimes when immigrants, both legal and illegal, have a lower crime rate than native-born Americans. But nobody's suggesting shipping out the native-born American.
Yeah, you know, they've got friends in the media who will run with a story, you know, an anecdotal story about a murder committed by an illegal alien, and just scare the heck out of people. You know, I've spent some time working down on the border as a volunteer with an organization in Del Rio that's you know, formed by a group of churches down there to basically help people who the Border Patrol or who ICE is allowing in, you know, giving them provisional asylum status, and then they just put them out the back door and say, well, good luck finding your way out of Del Rio. And so it gave the city of Del Rio a huge problem. And so they, you know, started working with this organization and to help people find their way to where they're going. And I'm a big believer that you can have all kinds of opinions about what's the right policy for immigration and still be a loving Christian, caring person for the individual immigrants, 99.5% of which are here for good, decent, honest reasons. But the problem is, if you're letting in people at that rate, 10 million at a time, you know, 99.5% of 10 million leaves 0.5% of 10 million. That's still a lot of bad hombres. And so that's the problem, is that the numbers are so massive, if there's no control at all, that you're going to have some people come in that you're not going to want. And now, you know, the problem isn't Mexico. It's not really hardly even Central America. Now it's Venezuela, it's Chinese, Russians, you name it. You know, people from all over the world are using Mexico as the gate of entry here. And so, I mean, I think like a libertarian in the sense that everybody should be free to find a place to live happily and pursue you know, their dream the way they see it. But I also think that I'm what I call a constitutional libertarian. If we're going to have laws, we need to enforce them. If we can enforce them because they're inconvenient, then we need to repeal them. And so, you know, there's a whole lot of improvement that we need in immigration. But right now, the two sides have each other by a headlock, and they don't care about solving the problem because it's just too profitable for them politically.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. Well, Clark, I have more questions. Do you have any before I go on?
Well, I was just going to quickly ask, Bob, you mentioned, of course, grandchildren and children. Yes, how many, if we're not being too personal, Bob, how many children and grandchildren do you have? And maybe you can mention your wife, how long you've been married, and
Right.
have you been able to convert? I mean, now that you're running for Congress, I would hope that some of your children and grandchildren, they've at least looked at libertarianism, if not.
Yes. Well, so I've been married for 39 years to my wife, Julie.
Congratulations.
I haven't fully converted her, but at times she's voted libertarian. So she's what I would call libertarian curious.
Mhm.
And I have two sons that are 34 and 31. One lives in Denver, one lives in Nashville, and one is sort of libertarian right, and one is sort of libertarian left. And so they're a microcosm of our party, aren't they?
Mhm.
And so we have good, interesting, big disagreements among us, just like libertarians do. But the principles of understanding, how our country came about, the Jeffersonian principles of founding the country, combined with the Madisonian principles of creating a structure that works for 250 years. Those are important. And I feel like I did a good job teaching my kids that stuff. Unfortunately, no grandchildren yet. 5 grand dogs. So you know how millennials are. They have dogs. One of these days, maybe. And in terms of converting people, I'm working really hard in my neighborhood. I brought 6 new people to our precinct meeting from the neighborhood. And, as y'all know, if you talk to people, they're a whole lot more small L libertarian than they think they are.
Mhm.
And I mean, everybody is. We got the winning message. There's no question about it. We just don't have, in my case, you don't have the best messenger. I'm just a dude. I'm not a slick politician who's, I'm just a guy. But if you have the right messengers and you have some amplification, I think there's a chance. And certainly people are disgusted with the situation we're in. And I don't have to tell you guys, it. Everybody's disgusted. And people are, I'd say close to half of the people in this country are open to what I call a small L libertarian message. Where they get hung up on is the arithmetic of voting for somebody who they have concluded is not very likely to win. And therefore, with the first past the post type of system we have, then, everybody's got to ask themselves, am I using my vote wisely? Of course, I tell them the stupidest thing you can do is vote for somebody you don't believe in. That's the dumbest thing you can do. Or another way of putting that is, if you constantly vote for the lesser of two evils, don't be surprised if you wind up with evil.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. That's one thing that we have to keep telling people. Like one of my statements is, you don't have to vote for Democrats and Republicans. They've screwed up the country. Declare your independence. Vote Libertarian. But it's just hard to get people to leave their tribes. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, you're right. We had a saying in the oil business that the guy who put the thing in the ditch ain't the guy who's going to get the thing out of the ditch. And
that's right.
And clearly, those two parties have us in the ditch. And so but I think what we have to do is we have to speak to people where they are. And, where they're not is in the esoteric debates that we libertarians tend to have with each other. That's not where they are. That's not where 97% of America is. And so we have to go out and talk to them and use their language. Now, I'm really influenced by a book that I think everybody should have, and it's called The 3 Languages of Politics. Are you guys familiar with that book?
No.
The author's name is Kling, not to be confused with King. Kling, K-L-I-N-G. And it's called The 3 Languages of Politics. And it basically talks about how conservatives see the world in terms of barbarians versus, civilization, right? Civilized people versus barbarians. And the progressives tend to view the world in terms of oppressors versus the oppressed. And libertarians, of course, we see the world in terms of coercion versus freedom. And we're just on 3 different axes. And so we can't talk to one another. That's a book that every libertarian needs to read because it helps us talk to other people and understand, hey, they just don't see the thing as a coercion versus freedom thing. They're stuck on this you know, this axis of oppression, and obviously, the thing that we're seeing now in the Middle East is a perfect analogy for that. Why two different groups see things completely opposite. They have different bad guys. That's what it boils down to.
Exactly. Well, Clark, how are we doing on time there?
Oh, good thing you brought that up. We have just over 6 minutes, gentlemen. So
Okay.
we should probably wrap up with maybe one or two more questions, and then of course we'll have Bob tell everyone where they can find him online.
Right. Well, I was going to ask about Chip Roy, because it seems like on some questions he's like almost a lone wolf. He's with a small group that actually seems to be for less government sometimes. Certainly not all the time, but more than some of his colleagues are. Do you think he understands economics better than most, or what would you say about him from that regard?
Chip Roy is running for the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Chip Roy is positioning himself to be the right-wing Republican who will run against John Cornyn in 26. That's what he's doing. And so he'll say things like we should defund the FBI. Well, I know there are libertarians who would jump for joy if we defunded the FBI, right? I don't happen to be one of them. I think we need an FBI. If we're going to have federal laws, we need to have a federal law enforcement group. It certainly needs to be better managed and brought to heel better than it has been lately. But I bring that up because he'll say whatever he needs to say to get to the far right of an issue. And that's what he's doing. And he certainly doesn't act like he perceives any risk that anything he says is going to hurt him in this election. I'm going to try to make him regret that a time or two. But he's fundamentally not serious. He had an issue a month or so ago about how, his biggest concern was we were all going to be forced to live under Sharia law.
What are the chances of that? Sheesh.
Well, yeah. And, we do have a First Amendment, that's pretty clear about that. I don't think there's a whole lot of doubt about that one. So it's just an example. So Chip sometimes he talks a libertarian game. And he hangs out with, guys like Thomas Massey. And sometimes you look at that and you go, well, maybe Chip's not really that bad. But then you see he's hanging out with Gates and, Marjorie Taylor Greene and that group of weirdos. Yeah. Because really what they're trying to do is maximize their social media impact so that they can become celebrities, so that he goes from being a congressman to being a national figure, and then he can run against Cornyn. And that explains everything. So, I don't happen to think he's a good guy. I think he's, I think he's a charlatan. He doesn't really believe in anything, but he's whipping up the electorate in a 2-to-1 red district, and that's what he's doing. Again, there are some things that he would advocate that I agree with, but on the whole, it's where he's coming from. He does not want to solve problems. And I had a football coach in high school who taught us a really important truism about life. And that is, it's amazing how much can be accomplished if no one cares who gets the credit. Yeah. If we had 10 or 15 libertarians in Congress, it'd change everything, because you'd have 10 or 15 people who did not care whether Joe Biden got the credit for this or Donald Trump got the credit for that, or what. It wouldn't matter. Doing the right thing is what matters.
Yes.
And we libertarians wouldn't need to control the House. We just need to have enough representation to where we could go either way and go the right way, depending on what the issue is. And so that's a principle that I think is lacking in Congress, is doing the right thing for the right reasons. Whereas most of them, they just want the credit because to them it's a career. The longer they can stay there, the more money they can rack up, the more speaking fees they can get, the more insider trading they can do. I think there's all kinds of corruption involved in how these guys make $160,000 a year in a high residential cost neighborhood and walk away from 20 years of service with tens of millions of dollars.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. There's moves on now to ban stock trading by
You know
Congress. I
what?
just
I
can't
agree.
believe they would pass it though.
Never thought I'd agree with AOC on anything, but I agree with her on that.
All right.
So
Well, yeah, we're coming up on about 1 minute. So let's give you, Bob, 30 to 45 seconds just to tell folks where they can find you either online or, your website. I did visit it. So, but let's let you tell everyone where
okay,
they can find you on their social media and website.
my website is www.bobking for, not the number four, but the word for, Bob King for Texas-21.org. And I'll tell you, I got a website that's full of all kinds of stuff. In fact, I had politicians tell me you got too much stuff on your website. But I believe in telling people what I believe. And so that's there. And I've got Facebook, and I've got Instagram, and I've got X, and I even have a girl who's doing some TikTok for me. So I'm doing a little bit of stuff. I made a music video to start this thing. I don't know if you all saw it, but you need to go see my music video and my musical and dancing skills as part of this deal. So I've done all kinds of stuff. I'm out there, and I guess what I'd say is I'm enjoying myself. And I think that there's a real opportunity for libertarians in the Texas Hill Country. We just have to get after it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm getting after it.
Excellent,
Well,
excellent. Well,
yeah,
thanks
thanks
so
so
much.
much.